have with me three people that I really admire. And I'm the publisher of Latino Leaders magazine. Some of you know me, but in my work, in my professional work, I have known people like the ones that I am honored to be seated by, and these people are the ones that have made an enormous contribution into what we know now as the Hispanic market, probably. The Hispanic market is something that is now trying to be understood, reinvented, and that is why the relevance and the experience of my colleagues will be interesting. So I'm going to just start with two main ideas. The Hispanic market is not monolithic. It's not monolithic. It's a market that is very complex and diverse. And whoever don't get that is probably directed to failure. And second one is that it is going to be, in the future, crucial for brands and organizations to understand this market and community the better they can if they want to survive. So, because I want to start with ladies first, I have here Yareli, Esteban. Yareli has a very deep and long experience with brands and marketing, Yareli. So we were discussing what are the challenges and opportunities that we are seeing in the Hispanic markets as you understand them today?
So I think the numbers really speak for themselves, right? So the biggest thing that we have going for us is that we drove 50% of the country's growth, which everybody in this room knows that, right? That's not new news. But we have a lot of opportunities in turning that into an economic development story, right? So we represent a lot of money from a consumer perspective, but that also translates into other areas. I think that the biggest opportunity that we have, and this is why it's so exciting to see like these organizations come together and the thought leadership behind them, is that we need to continue to elevate our community, right? We need to change the narrative, and that's going to be done by putting more people on the right seats, right? Putting more people in leadership. And we achieve that through education and advancement. Until we don't do that, right? Until that moment, we're still going to fall behind. And the narrative is going to be in the control of other folks that still see us as the Latinos of 10, 20 years ago, right? We're no longer necessarily an immigrant population. We are U.S. born, U.S. bred, and we are here to drive economic impact to the country.
All right. Now, there's many industries that are difficult, and I think our industry in publishing is one of those. For many years, Robert Bart has led Latina Style, who, for me, when I was starting Latino Leaders magazine, was one of those magazines out there that you needed to see and emulate, and I really praise him and his team, and now with Lupita Colmenero, because they have not only survived their growth and their endeavor. And Robert, you know, you have seen a lot of publications going on, going up, going down. What do you think is the contribution in all these years of a Hispanic-owned publication like yours?
You know, the biggest challenge that we have faced through the years with Hispanic-owned publications has been actually the fact that they were underfunded when they began. A lot of the times they began with the money that we could scrape off our, off our pockets, and okay, we'll put one issue today, maybe not an issue next week, but we'll put another issue then. And the Hispanic publications really came out of the desperate need to see some of our faces, to see some of our accomplished leaders represented to the media outside, because that was the primary ticket. It was if you get the outside media, the general market media, to pick up one of the stories or read something that you wrote, and they put it in their papers, in their TV shows, you would have made a tremendous accomplishment. The challenge is that whenever the economy shrunk, poof, they all went because they didn't have the financing in place. Even today, the financing in place for publications, it's not there. And the typical example of that is what happened with COVID. COVID wiped out at least 60% of all the Hispanic publications in the country. And even with the advent that the internet allowed you to be online, which is a lot less expensive, you still disappear. So for Hispanic publications to really be able to survive, they needed to get funding. The only way to get funding, and then became, well, I'll do whatever my advertiser wants. So you get company X, I have this press release, I want it out, I'll give you so much money, put it in the front page, and they would do that. So not only they had to face the fact that they had underfunded publications, but at the same time they had publications whose legitimacy was questioned. So you got the press release of that company at that point in time, and for the next one, the companies didn't want to because I know that you were selling it to somebody else. We have gone through a tremendous journey. When we launched Latina Style magazine, it was 1994. When we tried to launch the magazine and we tried to talk to potential advertisers, they look at it and they saw, wow, you're going to publish a magazine for Latina professionals in English, mostly educated in the United States? You're crazy. I mean, these Latinas are acculturated Latinas. They're already part of the mainstream. They don't need you. Why would they even read about you? And the biggest difficulty that we had was try to explain to them the cultural identity of our community, that it is not even the language. It cuts across all of our different countries. For a long time, it says, well, they're all Catholics. Well, not true, because our community is as segmented and divided as countries as it is by issues. Exactly. So it's been a journey. It's been extremely difficult, but the one thing that you have with media, if they cannot call you fake news, you're safe. And they're going to believe you, and you're going to retain identity. For us, we were very fortunate that during the COVID period, when we thought, because our company is a media company, and we do a lot of programs and conferences across the United States, what they gave us was their support through all this time.
Yeah. Now, you talk about culture, and culture is precisely what it means in the markets and how do you address them. Pedro Lerma is one of the gurus of Hispanic marketing. Generation after generation, ever since someone for the first time started making some advertising in Spanish, 40, 50 years ago. And Pedro has made inroads there. And Pedro, we were discussing here before entering the ballroom or this venue. You were telling me there's no general market anymore. How do we understand now the Hispanic market? What is it?
Well, the first thing I want to do is ask the people in the room, how many of you feel like you understand Hispanic marketing? How many of you have done some work in Hispanic marketing? How many of you understand the right ways to connect with the Hispanic market? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. And the reason I ask is because I feel like in some cases we're talking to ourselves. We're preaching to the choir. And we did talk a little bit back there about, it feels like we need to be bringing different types of people to these events. I think, anything that I might have to say about how to reach the Hispanic market, you probably already know. And I think, more than that, we just have to find ways to help one another continue to rise. I think, if I think about what we should all walk away from this event with, it is an urgency to introduce people to one another from this organization, to get on LinkedIn and figure out, if I exist in a role within a company that is a sourcing role for whatever product, is there somebody that was at the event today, somebody that I met that I could make an introduction for, so that they could grow their business, so that they could rise, so that they could be interviewed for a potential role within a larger organization. I think that's what I am called to do. I think even more than to try to teach you about the Hispanic market. You all know the Hispanic market.
Okay, thank you for that definition. That's very, very interesting.
And I'm sorry, Jorge, that wasn't a definition at all. It was just it was more of a hope that we could put out there.
But that's right. I mean, because at some point, all markets and communities need calls to action, and the mere mission of marketing is a call to action, a call to buy, a call to integrate or to purchase something. So the dynamics that the market is having is really impressive. And I want to go back to Yareli with that precise concept on evolution. The Hispanic market or the Hispanic community, or the Hispanic is not what is it today that what it was 40, 50 years ago.
It's totally different. I've been doing this for 25 years, and the conversation from 20 plus years ago was, more around acculturation, language. It was all about language. Now, and we were talking about this earlier, it's about the insight. How do you connect, right? What are the gaps? And I love what Pete said about, the call to action for all of us. I was sharing with this group earlier. I came from another event where an organization, Supplier IO, did a disparity study. And we have a lot of gaps, and most of them are driven by money, right? So we've got the population numbers now, but the money has not followed, and we have to work on the financial aspect of it, because until we don't close that gap, that disparity gap that is from supply chain, sourcing, job creation, advancement in companies, we're never going to get there, right? We're never going to be seen as equal, and that is our job as leaders, is to work on that narrative and work on closing that gap, and it starts with introductions, absolutely. So I think it's evolved. I think right now the time is critical that we have the numbers. There's never been a better time to talk about this narrative. And I think in looking at other underserved groups in the U.S. that have gotten a lot of traction, even though we don't have the same narrative and the same story or the same history with a country, we can certainly take pages out of their playbooks and unite and have a consistent narrative so that we do get the opportunities. We're not going to get them by osmosis, guaranteed. You got to know how to ask for it, and it starts with this network and being able to ask for it.
I think what's different about the market is that we have matured. So not only do we have the numbers, but we have the influence in culture. So today, American culture is multicultural culture. If you think about what is happening in pop culture or in entertainment, you have your Hamiltons, the Heights, you have Coco, you have Encanto, you have actually in New York, at the last Hispanic Leadership Summit, a speaker talked about how Hollywood over the last 10 years has only had 4% Latinos with speaking parts, not even lead roles, but just a speaking part. And I think it was last week it was announced that Bad Bunny is going to be the next Marvel superhero. So we have the power, and I think it's time for us to stand up and act like we have the power and to make those asks.
Now, what do we need to do in order to move all these corporations and organizations to take action? Yareli was mentioning funds, money. Robert started his first question with the financial part. Where do you ever see, Robert, that we will ever see that the expenditure on media like yours will be proportional to the population of consumers of companies?
No, that's never going to happen. You know, the way you're going to, if we're talking about selling, right? We're talking about selling to Hispanics. And that is just one part of how to work with the community. Because the true measure of success will be if you empower the community. For us, for instance, you know, our audience is Latina, right? Like I had said before, the Latina community was believed not to be existent since before the year 2000. The year 2000 census comes out, and Latinas are the fastest growing segment of the small business community. And all of a sudden today, you know, you see everything is Latina, Latina this, Latina that, Latina organizations. And they have an opportunity to reach out the household, because how do you reach a household? Through the Latinas. Who are the people who do the most to really affect the household? Latinas. Who is the one that decides takes at the last minute, you're going to go to the doctor because enough is enough, because the husband won't do it. You know, the Latina will pick up the baton and take you there by the ear. So everything that comes out towards empowering Latinas today has to do with the fact that he's been recognized as an influencer. But the challenge is this. My children are not like me. My children follow, I don't know what they follow, actually. You know, to be honest with you, because once they get on the phone and they're able to read the phone, which is an accomplishment in itself, and you go into flip, you know, with one hand, with one thumb, they're going through the world. So how do you reach those children? So when you're talking about Hispanic market, you know, are you trying to reach older Hispanic market? Are you trying to reach the Hispanic market that is American-born, which is the majority of Latinos in the United States? Or are you trying to reach an elderly Hispanic market? Are you trying to reach the young people? We're all trying to figure out how to do this. So for us, I believe that what is imperative is that we find a way to approach reaching the Hispanic market in a multi-level. One has to do with the culture, like Peter said. Another has to do with the images that you present to the Hispanic market. And it's not, you know, you want to sell a car to a Latino, sell them red. Put commercials in red cars, because Latinos like red. So that will work wonderful. But it's not like that. You have to reach them at different, in different parts of the heart. And the most important thing, I think, is to have, you know, an empathy for all the different communities, because a lot of it, you know, my favorite car commercials, Subaru. You guys see the Subaru commercials? And they have more impact to me than any of the other ones. So when we look at the Hispanic market as a whole, and all of us who work in this market, for instance, I go to speak to a corporation and I want to tell them why they should support the work that we do. The magazine is the last component, because our company's got 4 different divisions. So we work with the military, we work with Latina professionals, and we work with Latina entrepreneurs and Latina leaders. And also we work through our nonprofit entity, Parents Step Ahead, with the schools. So what we're trying to say is that this is a market that is growing, because most people will not comprehend where we're 50 million people. What does that mean? That you do a product to sell to 50 million people is not going to work like that.
Now, we still have the mission of trying to tell a story of the Hispanic community, the Hispanic market, and try to sell that story to those that need to understand it in order to make business, grow their companies, and sell more. Yareli talked about narrative. Pedro spoke about the individual and the markets. How do we change that narrative? Where do we start, or has already started, and how do we push better to do it?
I think it has started, and I think we have to continue to push marketers, brands to consider this. I say this a lot to my clients. Consider leading with the underrepresented in your storytelling. And when you do that, there's a way for you to, yes, connect with that underrepresented segment, but there's also a way for you to endear yourself to everybody else. And so I think of a couple of examples. So In the Heights was a story that was rooted in Puerto Rican culture. I'm not Puerto Rican, but I loved it. It meant something to me. And so I'll give you another example. So, and this is not even a Latino example, but Amazon had a spot that ran recently, and it featured a hearing impaired employee. And he was an user experience designer. And he talked about how Amazon had created an environment where he could be his whole self and he could thrive. And it showed him in the workplace and it showed him at home. And at the end of that spot, I felt good about Amazon. I am not a member of the special needs community. I don't have hearing issues, but that meant something to me. So we've got to push to lead with the underrepresented. And a lot of times, the underrepresented segment is going to be the Hispanic market.
Yareli, how hard, how pushy should we be, if any? Because it has been mentioned that the Hispanic community is too soft, too amable, too you know, and other communities like the black community or the Jewish community are more like pushy and more less timid, let's say.
The time is now. If we miss this opportunity, we're never going to have this moment in time again, right? So no longer do we need to be amables. You know, we need to stick to the numbers. The numbers tell the story. There's economic reasons why these numbers make sense for everyone in the country, regardless of what color. We're driving jobs, right? Latinas, like you mentioned, we're creating companies. We're the fastest segment of small business creation. Guess what? We create jobs, right? That's not just, and those jobs mean increased spending power for all the brands represented in this room. So there is a business case. I think if you're at a company, learn the numbers, figure out what the business case, pick a thing, pilot it, and the numbers in the case study will sell the story, right? But it's going to take all of us in a different levels, right? Myself as a small business owner, I can impact my involvement in community outreach, right? In boards that I participate in activities that I am involved with, where I spend my money, with what brands. But we have to stick to the numbers. We can't just assume it's going to happen by itself. It's not going to.
Now, sometimes telling those stories require platforms, right? Like Robert and Lupita's platform, Latina Style, maybe like our Latino leaders also, to tell those stories and to change the paradigms and to change the narrative. But you mentioned something, Robert, before, and Pedro started with that. In these type of events, we should have more non-Latinos sitting there. And you said, actually, the only Latinos should be the ones in the panel.
Absolutely. I agree with that. You know, what would it take for us to put a conference where the only Latinos or Latinas are the experts presenting in the panels, and all the rest of the audience is non-Latino? Because that's who we need to talk to, you know? And, you know, I congratulate you, Claudia, for what you've done, because I've been in this community, in the Hispanic communities, you know, since 1993, fully engaged. I was part of many of the Hispanic organizations when they got founded in California. And we all thought that, you know, if we band together, we'll make things change. And the fact is that things don't change unless you penetrate, if you will, the power centers where the power is. So one of the things that we're always trying to figure out is how do we get to the seat of power? Because you and I, Jorge, we publish a magazine as part of our work that is very respectful. They're very influential, but when they see the word Latino or Latina, how do I know that a non-Latino is going to pick it up and read it? Why? So you're figuring out, how do I put something really aggressive, something really weird on the cover so they'll pick it up? So the only way we can do it is by living in that world. My advice to young Latina professionals that are rising through the ranks is, the place that I would volunteer, because we talked a lot about volunteering, my place would be, I would volunteer in museums. I would volunteer at the opera. I would volunteer in the places where the whole board, if you go and look at the board of the people that are there, are the most powerful people in our country. Because the DuPonts, that's where they are. And their influence is unlimited. And as long as you work there and they get to see you, they begin to get familiar with you, and they begin to get comfortable with you, they'll give you a chance. For us, we had you ask her how we survived. Jorge, I had a very, very blessed audience that was white women. And I truly believe that white women are the creators of the minority community. Because if white women hadn't put their foot down with their husband and they say, we're going to create this minority community, but we're going to be part of it. And of course, white women are the one that take the biggest benefit of anything that is minority. White women organizations are the ones that get the biggest share. But they had the power, and they began to move the needle. For us, all of us, that are trying to influence, a community that controls the financial power, it's not good enough to tell them, well, we're going to be 50 million. What's the picture that comes into their head? They're going to come over the walls, and they're going to take everything. It's scary. So economic empowerment has to be the key. So for all of us, the most important thing is how do we bring economic empowerment to our community? And one of the places where we all should be involved, it's in the schools. 55% of the kids here in Dallas that are coming into the schools are Latinos. We should be all engaged, especially corporations, should be engaged in the schools, in education, because it's extremely important that they begin to grow like that. And another thing, how many of our parents, of all the people that we have in the room, have children that don't know anything about the Hispanic community in the United States? I asked my staff they're younger than us at the magazine, names of people, and they're just like, we don't know who those people are. I'm lucky if they didn't know who Cesar Chavez is. But beyond that, they don't know anybody that is that. But it's our responsibility to educate our own children on our own culture. Oops, my time's up.
Yeah. You talk too much. Just kidding. No, finish, please. Do it.
Yeah. So please make sure that your children, they're hard to understand as it is, but at least make sure that they understand the culture that we're trying to promote and to enrich and bring to the rest of the public.
Now, trying to bring to the understanding of the general, or whatever we call the new market, Pedro. What are those common elements that will reach Hispanics very well, very deep into their souls?
Well, I think it's a super high-level question. I mean, there are some commonalities across the different subsegments within the Hispanic market, and I guess I think there are two approaches you can take. One would be to go in and try to hyper-target a segment. If you're trying to reach, the Cuban community, or if you're trying to reach the Mexican community. Or you can do something that is more universal in nature. And I don't know that either one of those is necessarily the right way. I think it all comes down to who your audience is, what your geographic footprint looks like, what your brand can do, and in terms of budget, can you customize messages to the various targets or not? But again, I would say you have an opportunity today that if you want to lean into any one of those sub-segments, don't be afraid to do that. I mean, the example I gave you of the Heights being, about the Puerto Rican culture, but having universal appeal, you shouldn't get too hung up on, the market not being monolithic. There are opportunities to, create universal appeal.
You were mentioning this Broadway show, Hamilton, right? How that has had success in the Hispanic community as well as in the others, since it's about an American story.
Yes, and I love it, and I see more and more of it. I mentioned Encanto a while ago. I was in Denver talking to a healthcare client, a big hospital system, and they were asking questions that, to me, were red flags. Some of the questions were, well, how much of that Hispanic community, speaks English? And what that meant to me was that in their minds, they might be able to ignore them and just reach them in, with their general market work. And so I took that opportunity to say, think about this. You might be able to reach them in English, yes. But I pulled up my phone, I looked up the top 10 songs in America on the Billboard charts, and the #1 song in the country was We Don't Talk About Bruno, which is the song from Encanto. And I explained, this is what's happening. I mean, Hispanic culture is influencing culture. And so, don't get myopic about things and, try to do the least in terms of engaging the Hispanic community. There's a chance for you to just go all in and know that you can do it in a way that doesn't alienate the rest of your audience.
Mm-hmm. Now, Yareli, do you have any examples on what has worked with your clients on that sense?
I have a great example I want to talk about. Is there anybody in the room from Deloitte? No? Yes? Oh, good. Hi. So I'm gonna plug Deloitte. Deloitte has they have a D&I, obviously huge team and effort, and they did a transparency report where they found that the bulk of the tax accountants are white males, right? And they drew a line in the sand, and they've made some very bold commitments to increase the number of accountants in both Black and Hispanic communities, which is wonderful. And the report's like 40 pages long, right? Amazing report, the transparency report. And now they've put aside $75 million. Started last year, it's going to go for the next 5 years to address some of the gaps, right? There are gaps from educational perspective. There are gaps, like you mentioned, DISD, it's 70% Hispanic, right? 100% subsidized meals because of the demographic, because there's still a socioeconomic issue that we have, right, in terms of a gap. And they're addressing some of these gaps at the high school level, at the college level. Then you get out of college, and guess what? You're the first. You're the first in your family, like you, right, Pete? So you're the first to have made it out of a blue-collar environment into a white-collar world, right? So how do you succeed when you're the first in your family and you're coming from humble beginnings to make it in corporate America? How many Pedro Lermas will there be, right? And of course, some make it, but many don't. So that program is like the type of program that makes me very excited to be doing this kind of work, because I think it's the right thing to do, right? They're addressing the issue. They're not just saying, oh, we're going to do some social media about it, or we're going to make a pledge. They're putting some money and resources behind it, and they're going to measure it, right? And that's very exciting, because I think any brand here in the room can do the same thing. What are you doing to advance your supply chain from an HR perspective, from a human capital perspective, right? And from a supply chain perspective with suppliers, right? So there's so much to be done. And it's very exciting because when you see a program like that and a company as big as Deloitte make such a bold commitment, I think it shows that it can be done.
And the Latino market is really loyal to companies that are perceived to be doing a serious, honest commitment, no? You mentioned leaders also, but go ahead with your comment, but you mentioned leaders and the fact that we need to rewrite that narrative through leadership.
Well, before I forget, one of the companies that has really made the biggest commitment into the minority communities is JP Morgan Chase. They made a commitment of $30 billion allocated to serve minority communities, which is, beyond anything that we can imagine. On leadership, when we launched the magazine, Jorge, there was one Latina member of Congress that helped us launch the company. Now there are 19. The political system is, of course, I don't want to go there because we all know what that is. But leadership is something that is developed, and it's not something that you take by your own. So what we do when we nurture leadership is that, it's been mentioned in panels all morning. How do you do mentorship? How do you do sponsorships? How do you bring people in? And all the companies are beginning to look at this. One of the great things that is happening in corporate America is the advent of ERGs, employee resource groups. Employee resource groups in which the companies have said, okay, we're going to put a group of so many, employees that have some common background, and we're going to see if we can help them stay there. Because the retention rates, especially after what's happened after COVID, it's been very, very, very difficult. And bringing people in, it's very difficult as well. So companies are beginning to take a look at that and doing leadership. And some companies are, exceptional at doing that. That's part of the work that we do with our company. And a company like Johnson & Johnson, for instance, has got an incredible ERG. So do, most of the banks. The banks have really stepped up to the plate, during the COVID pandemic.
Now, we have a little bit less than a minute. I would like to ask you, as a takeaway for not only the people here, but us, what will be a call to action in your vision to change that narrative, to rewrite or retell the Hispanic story out there, so people and this community and this country can understand better who we are and where are we going?
When I think that one of the first things that you need to do is educate yourself so you can give some examples of true leadership in the United States. People who have really made a difference, in advancing our country. That's pretty much everything that I can, and mention them. Whenever they ask you, well, what about the Hispanic community? You can throw them a heavyweight. You can a knockout punch so they understand what you do. The other thing, and the most important thing, make sure you tell the people that you love them every day, because tomorrow may not be here. So tell your children, hug them and kiss them, and tell them that you love them. Tell your spouses that you love them. And I didn't mean to get into that, but there is so much bad happening in the world right now. Yeah. Anywhere you look at, that today is the day to tell them and love them.
Yareli?
I would say know your numbers inside and out and contextualize them by your industry, your category. Make them real, make them tangible. We're going to do this one piece at a time, but we will get there.
All right. Pedro.
I would say if you're in a position to drive a brand and its connection with the Hispanic market, of course, root your advertising in a meaningful insight. Of course, go beyond just translating the work that you're doing in the general market. of course, reach them in Spanish language media. Go and spend money in Spanish language media, but also reach them in English language media. But beyond that, push the brand to stand for something within the Hispanic community beyond just selling them a product. I think if brands want to truly engage the Hispanic market, it's more than just talking at them. You have got to consider the Hispanic market a beloved member of your brand community, and you've got to do things that are real. Get in there and support programs that help Hispanics, Latinos rise within the community or within your organization. Today, consumers are voting with their wallets, and they expect brands to do those kinds of things.
Now, what a great panel we had, didn't we? I just want to say, to end these, now go outside and talk what we have talked today to your friends, to your non-Latino friends, to your boss, to your clients. We need more of this narrative to go out and then come back as a better understanding on who we are, where are we going, and the future of this country. So thank you, my three wonderful and admired panelists, Robert, Yareli, Pedro, gracias. Claudia, thank you for putting this together. I think this is a great idea.
Thank you so much. Let's give it again to this